Hey LinkedIn, and welcome to Business Unusual. This is a live show where we talk about the changing nature of work. I'm Susie Jackson. I'm a news editor at LinkedIn, coming to you live from my home in New York City. On today's show, we're going to talk about time management. When the pandemic began and many of us started to work from home, we were in a panicked state. For good or for bad, all of our old routines were thrown away and replaced with whatever felt like it was working in that moment. We're several months into this now, and I feel like I'm still in a limbo, waiting to know if this is the new normal or if it's going to happen soon. I'm wondering how you feel about that as well. We might be stuck now in rhythms that were never meant to be routines, and we want to talk about that today. How do we break out of those bad routines and into some better ones? It's happening on an individual level. It is also happening on an organizational level. Companies are seeing increases in productivity from employees as commutes and boundaries have disappeared. But is that productivity sustainable? Do you find yourself working at all hours, at odd hours? How long can we really keep this up? I want to know where you stand on this. Talk to me during the show today, talk to each other. We want to know, are you managing your time well these days? Does it feel efficient? Are you ready for a change? Do you really want things just to go back to the way they used to be, into your old routines? Talk to us throughout the show. We have a couple of great guests that I want to welcome who are going to talk with us about this at the individual, managerial, and organizational level. I'd like to welcome Francesca Hogi to the show. She is a principal at Francesca Hogi Coaching, and the host of the Dear Franny podcast, as well as I'd like to welcome executive coach Sabina Nawaz, CEO of Nawaz Consulting. Ladies, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Exactly. So excited to be here.
Wonderful. And I think the stream is going to be really excited to hear from you, because whatever the situation you're in, it's probably still different. We have people starting to go back to work in some states. Some other people think that they're in it at home for the long haul. And I think it's a great time to reassess what's really working and what isn't. So Francesca, I'd love to start with you. We've seen these old routines get upended, and the ones that are in their places might not be that sustainable.
Yeah.
How do we assess where we are at right now?
Great question. And I definitely see a lot of people who are struggling with routine right now. A lot of my clients are dealing with this. And one of the biggest things that I recommend for people is to actually spend a few days just doing a time audit and just paying attention to, okay, what is the routine? What are you spending your time on? And how is it making you feel? Because if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling burnt out, one of the challenges for working from home that a lot of people are now doing for the first time is that it's very easy to fall into this routine of feeling, or this mindset of feeling that if you're awake, you should be working, right? Because you quote unquote don't have anything else to do, right? Like you don't have anywhere else to be. And so that is an understandable thing to fall into. However, over time, that is not sustainable. It's not good for your emotional health, your mental health, and ultimately it's not good for your work product, because if you aren't taking care of yourself and you're not able to create some space for yourself personally, then the professional can really overwhelm your life, and then you're not going to be as productive with your work. So I encourage people to really take a look at, okay, how much time am I spending working? How much, do I feel a pressure and obligation to feel like, oh, well, I'm home. Everyone knows I'm home, so I don't have an excuse not to work, even if it's 10 o'clock at night. And just making sure that you're not falling into that trap.
Yeah, these are huge changes. I think it's sound advice to say, just take a moment and actually see what is going on. What is the pattern that has emerged? And is it time to change that? And Sabina, I want to ask you, speaking of changes, I think if you're a manager, this is also a big change. Not only are you going through this individual shift yourself, but now you're responsible to care for and motivate your team in a new way. I find that soft skills aren't always prioritized in the way that they should be to make happy teams, but they seem to be more important than ever right now. What would you say to managers who might be shifting from more setting strategy and telling people to go execute it into a role where they really need to facilitate communication and support amongst their employees?
Yes, Susie, absolutely. I think of managers as, in the corporate world, first line responders with a lowercase. For every one manager, there are dozens, perhaps hundreds of people relying on them and the tone they're going to set, the tenor of the culture they're shaping, the direction they're giving people, and so on. I don't see it as a dichotomy between either set strategy and direction or do the soft skills to take care of people and communicate with them. It's a question of integration. It's melding the two of those together, because when you are great at the soft skills, you are going to be great at the hard business results. There is incontrovertible proof and research that demonstrates the connection there. And that is super important these days, because we don't have that face-to-face connection, because we live in such uncertain times where, as you said, Susie, you're still holding your breath if this is the new normal 4 months into it. So it's super, super important to think about those soft skills. And if you're just starting to think about it, it's not as hard as you think it might be. There are some really simple things you can do to address that. 3 of those I'll share with you. One is the power of gratitude, the power of just saying thank you. People are afraid. People are afraid they're going to lose their jobs. They're going to get laid off. Some people have been laid off and they worry they'll go the way of their colleagues. They don't know if they should be in a meeting or not. I was just in a meeting right before this where one of the executives said suddenly they had 100 people show up to this meeting that normally has about a dozen folks. And they didn't know why these people showed up. And I think the fear of missing out. What if someone notices I'm not there, as Francesca says, because I'm supposed to be there all the time now, aren't I? So simply saying thank you and releasing people from the pressure of having to be always on is one big piece. The other one is to name and acknowledge what's going on for people. So before you start the business of the meeting, do a quick check-in, a 1-word, 1-sentence check-in. 1 word that captures my frame of mind right now, and 1 sentence that elaborates on that. And people notice that the words span a spectrum. And therefore, you have a sense of where people are. And also by naming my emotions, I am now able to get on with the business of the meeting, because that's been acknowledged, that's been validated. And that leads to the 3rd piece, which is structure. So soft skills actually can be done in a hard way. That is not a difficult hard way, but a concrete way, is by structuring things in the face of uncertainty, have consistency in how you connect with people and how you conduct meetings. So things like check-ins, check-outs, a midpoint check-in, a weekly video communication going out from the CEO to the rest of the company, that people can count on the predictability of a rhythm, as Francesca talks about a routine.
Yeah, thank you for those practical tips, Sabina. I think it's really interesting to hear 100 people showing up to a meeting. Usually meetings are things people would run away from. And we're going to talk more about meetings in a moment. If you're just joining us now, I want to welcome you to the stream. This is Business Unusual. Today we are having a conversation with Francesca Hogi and Sabina Nawaz, both career coaches. We're talking about time management. I want to say hello to Shannon from California. Thank you for joining us. Molly from Chicago. Philip is joining us from Canada today. Diana from Colorado and Eric from Michigan. It's great to see you all on the stream. Thank you for being with us. We also have Shannon saying that as a single mom, she finds it extremely difficult to establish a routine. I think a lot of people are feeling that. Francesca, now that physical boundaries are gone, how are we supposed to demarcate our work and non-work lives? We're not commuting anymore. We're not sitting within the 4 walls of an office. Those physical markers aren't there. How do we start to build them into our routines?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for one, it's important to just have compassion towards yourself, right? And I know that might not seem related to time or business, but it is, because it is such uncharted territory. And for someone who is a single mom, and even people who are maybe not single parents, but are parents, and now you have your kids home and there's a whole other dimension that you're juggling right now, it's very easy to feel like I should know what to do, but how would you know what to do, right? It's a process of figuring it out. So giving yourself the compassion to say, well, okay, this is brand new territory. I'm navigating professional, emotional, familial, and it's going to be a bit of a challenge. So really, really creating that space for yourself, just mentally and emotionally, to know that it's going to be a process of figuring it out. That's, I think, the baseline, because if you're stuck in a place of, I should figure this out. Why is this hard for me? I should know what to do. You got to release that self-judgment, because, why would you? We're all in uncharted territory. So that's the first thing. And then, as I kind of mentioned before, and I wish that everyone had managers like Sabina is, Sabina has such great advice, and anybody who's listening who is in a managerial position, please just do what she just suggested, because it's going to make it so much easier for your employees, to bring that empathy and knowing that everyone is navigating a lot right now, especially on an emotional level, which just impacts everything. So if you don't have a great boss, like, one of Sabina's clients, then, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. However, to feel empowered to say to your manager, to your team, hey, I'm going to be available from this time to this time, sending an email that says, at the end of the day, just like FYI, I'm not going to be checking email for the rest of the evening, but I'm happy to discuss this tomorrow. So just setting those boundaries at work are very important. They're more important now than ever, because if you don't set the boundaries, then your entire life can just now be this sense of obligation that you've got to be working. And I know that even for people who don't have kids, because I have a lot of clients who don't have kids, and they sometimes feel like, oh, well, I have to pick up the slack because other people do have families. And so they have a hard out at the end of the day, even though we're not physically commuting. And I don't have that hard out. So now there's a sense of obligation to be working. But, it's not about, competing for empathy, right? All employees, all people, we all deserve empathy. And so creating those boundaries and not feeling that you have to explain, well, I just need some time for myself, or I need some time with my kid. I mean, it's like, that should be a given. And if it's not, then it's up to you to really constructively communicate with your team, with your boss, with your clients, and let them know when you're going to be available as you navigate and you figure out what your new routine is going to be.
Yeah, that feeling of needing self-compassion and being less judgmental on ourselves and others is coming up a lot on this show. And I think it's a message that we just can't hear enough of, because it's too easy to fall back in when you're by yourself, sitting alone, maybe with your family in the room, but without your coworkers to kind of keep checking back in on. This is not normal, and it's okay to have these struggles. Deborah in the stream is agreeing with you, Francesca. She says self-compassion is so important. Offer space to move forward more easily. I think that's a great sentiment from you, Deborah. Thank you for joining us today. Sabina, I want to go back to meetings for a moment. You were talking about that executive who said 100 people showed up to this meeting, where normally a dozen people show up. And we're joking that the meeting culture is something that people gripe about all the time. We're seeing some companies, though, kind of double down on it. Maybe it's more of a micromanaging culture. They want more meetings. They think more face-to-face checking in is the answer. Even as we know, their Zoom fatigue is real. Being on too many meetings is so draining. Where do you think that balance is? Or are there other ways that managers and companies should be finding to check in with employees?
It is a really tough question. And a lot of managers are doing this with the best of intentions, because they really do want to convey care and concern for their employees, and they're checking in. Well, you could also check in with a brief text and so on. Some employees are saying, now we have these forced happy hours where I have to be there. And that kind of defeats the purpose of why those were created, if people are creating virtual happy hours. So where can you make some things voluntary when they are purely for connecting? In terms of work meetings, my guidance to people has been to meet more often, but for much shorter bursts. So if you had an hour-long meeting, once a week, could you do 4 15-minute meetings 4 times a week instead? Because things are changing so rapidly. And we are cycling through emotions and levels of productivity so rapidly. Francesca, I'm going to take a dose of your self-compassion piece, because I was completely useless for the first 2 days of this week. Just overwhelmed with everything that's going on in the world, nothing specific. So I think from a meeting perspective, shorter bursts, fewer, more often, but with fewer attendees as well. So really being more of a gatekeeper of, why do you need to come into this meeting? And for the group that had the 100 people join, my guidance to them was, it probably means that you are not communicating outward enough of what's going on in your meetings, what they need to know. Are you being transparent enough, and are you doing that frequently enough? One thing that is working really well for many organizations right now is to run meetings that start 5, 10, or 15 minutes past the hour. So if it's a 30-minute meeting, do it in 25 minutes. If it's a 60-minute meeting, you do it in 55, 50, or 45 minutes. And don't run it from 1 to 1:45, but run it from 1:15 to 2. So everybody, it gives people time and removes the reason for being late. It gives people time for that break. And we all know we've got to stop at 2 pretty promptly in most cases.
Oh, that's an interesting shift to kind of mess with your head a little bit. You're used to 1 o'clock, maybe you show up at 1:03, 1:05, but now it's 1:15 and now you're at attention. You got to really get there at 1:15 because it's going to start. That's a good little trick. Thank you for that one.
Yeah.
We've got some folks in the stream who are loving this. Paul says, good point, boundaries equal empathy. Victoria is joining from Santa Cruz, California. Hello, Victoria. She says, seeing her desk and laptop all day makes her feel like she's supposed to be working every time that she's seeing that. Francesca, I know that you're working with people who are not in traditional office jobs as well. I'm curious, so we've got the office workers, they're in their office, which is their home all the time, too much. What about folks who aren't in that situation? What are their time management challenges been?
So they still have the same, because it's still easy to feel this feeling that, well, I'm here, I'm here being home, right? And so the laptop is always there, right? There's always an opportunity to work. One thing that I really suggest for my clients is, kind of regardless of what their work schedule is to try to make sure that they leave at least a couple of hours in the morning between the time that they wake up and the time that they start working. And the reason that I suggest giving yourself that, I mean, I know that 2 hours, for some people might be watching this and saying, oh, I wish I could have that much time to myself. But it's not necessarily even alone time. Like, so if you're a parent, for instance, you have 2 hours in the morning where that's your time to spend with your kids or your family, or to exercise or to read or to meditate or whatever it is. But it helps to break up this idea that waking up means right to work, right? And so I really recommend that people try to build in, and if you can't do 2 hours, at least 1 hour. Another tip that I give a lot of my clients is to the extent that's possible. And I know, look, I'm from New York. I live in LA now, so I have a lot more space, but I'm from New York City. I lived there a long time. I know that a lot of people don't have tons of room in their apartments, but to the extent that you can really create a part of your apartment, even if it's a corner that is where you do your work, keeping your laptop out of your bed is a huge thing. Trying to really segment work is a thing that happens at times. It's not your entire life. So, physically, obviously, if you have the ability to have an at-home office, which I know is a luxury most people don't have, that is a great place to really try to keep your work limited to that space. But, creating time and space for yourself, that is all about, setting boundaries and really having as much balance as we can have. There's never going to be exact 50-50 balance, but it is kind of looking at what you're doing and saying, okay, where can I create a little bit more time and space for myself? How can I create some more separation between work? I mean, I know that I personally, and Sabina, I'm sure you can relate to this too, because we are self-employed, we're entrepreneurs. And when you have your own business, like a lot of my clients do, then there's an extra pressure because you're extra invested in what you're doing. And there's an extra pressure to feel like you've got to maximize every moment and do something for your business. But I've seen it time and time and time again with my clients and with myself. When you actually give yourself more time and space, just emotionally, mentally, physically, walking around the block, if that's what it takes, just to give yourself that break in the day, you are so much more productive. You're so much more creative. You're so much more inspired and energized to do work when it is time for work.
I love that concept of space, and not just in the physical sense. In the physical sense, it is important. You're saying demarcate your space, be more rigid in terms of where you're working and where you're not. But then in the other sense of emotional and mentally, I think that's really important. And we're seeing that from some of the viewers right now too. Sean is saying, if you have a flexible schedule, take advantage of it. He says, I sometimes take an extra 30 minutes to go for a short walk with my son, and then he's able to tack that time on later in the day or perhaps later in the week. Jacqueline is struggling with the physical space. She says, I go right to my desk, and I'm learning that that's not good. So we're hearing build some time in between. Let's see. And Shannon also been trying to go for a walk every day to get away from work. So trying to find ways physically, but really it's mentally, to make that space between work and not work really important as this thing stretches out for who knows how long. And Sabina, let me go back to you for a moment. We don't know how long this is going to last. And we were talking earlier about managers having to learn to manage differently, to support their teams differently. But then just back to the basics. It's harder to do that remotely than when you're in person. What are some of the differences there? We're going to say 2 big differences that we should be keeping in mind as managers right now.
In terms of managing remotely versus in person, yeah. I think I think one of the big differences is how do I manage people's work and performance? It's hard to know what's going on. And I'd say first create space for grace. Create space for grace because you don't know why that person isn't responding to that email or hasn't met that deadline and hasn't communicated about it. We know that, for example, the instances of domestic violence have spiked worldwide. You never know what's going on for that person. So try and understand, is this unusual for this person? Is this a common pattern? And then think about how you diagnose what's going on before you jump in and intervene and create a solution for it. So that's one piece. I think the second piece is really, even more so than before, encouraging people to come to you with problems, not solutions. So reverse the phrase, come to me with solutions, not problems, to come to me with problems, not solutions. Think about the virus. We want to know where a new case has been diagnosed and what's the contact tracing and all of that. It's no different in the world of work, that when there are problems, there are fewer informal mechanisms and fewer ways for me to know what's going on unless somebody gets those to me early and often.
I like the catchy thing, save space for grace. I like the rhymes. I think that's a good one to remember. We're talking more about space again. And Kathy is echoing that in the stream. She's saying find time for meditation and to breathe. Getting more into that headspace, Francesca, I want to hear about the should mentality. What if there's no voice in your head always on you about what you should be doing in this time?
Yeah, yes. So I call that shoulding all over yourself. So when you're in that should place, honestly, just know that that's kind of natural and normal. We all have that voice in our head that's telling us something that is at times going to be unproductive, but just acknowledging it, but also questioning it, just challenging that, just saying, well, why should I do this right now? Who said I should? Is it true? I feel like I should be working right now. I feel like I should, but should I? Like, is that actually true? And just starting to challenge that thought rather than just co-signing it. And I also want to, piggyback on what Sabina just said, because it is so important to understand that with everything that's going on in the world, with the pandemic, with the protests, with everything that's happening, everyone is dealing with it in a different way. And we're all on a different emotional journey. And there are days where I have felt super inspired and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a great time. And there are days that I felt really heavy and it's been really challenging. And so if you're beating yourself up with that should, going back to self-compassion, then you are actually going to find yourself being more stuck, and it's going to be harder to move forward because of that judgment. So releasing the should, challenging the should when it comes into your mind. Is this really a should? Or am I actually just habituated to be hard on myself, to beat myself up? And is this actually an opportunity for me to give myself a little bit of a break and to give myself some time and space? One other thing that I want to mention, because I think we all can relate to feelings of procrastination. We can all relate to feelings of getting distracted by something, whether it's social media or whatever, and going down a rabbit hole and then having that moment of like, oh, I just wasted all of this time doing this thing. But what I've actually found time and time again is that when you give yourself an opportunity, if you know I need a 15-minute break, I need a 30-minute break, I know I need to get outside and take a walk, or hey, I need to go on social media and catch up, and just give yourself the time to do that. Give yourself that 15 minutes or 20 minutes to do that. Then you can go back to work and not feel deprived. And then it's going to be a lot easier for you, moving forward, to just make sure that you are, getting into a routine that serves you and not one that keeps you feeling stuck and overwhelmed.
Francesca, thank you for giving me permission to just mindlessly shop for leggings online to maintain a sense of control in my life. Speaking of taking a break, Sabina, I want to ask you, what about real actual breaks? How should managers be encouraging their employees to take vacation at this time? It's a time where people aren't really thinking about travel. They might not think about vacation, but is that really important to still bake into our routines?
It's funny you should ask that, Susie, because Harvard Business Review's management tip of the day today is my article on managers and how they might encourage the employees to take vacation. Vacation has changed, of course. We're not going to be traveling very far, if at all. And so the single biggest thing in terms of taking vacation is to take vacation yourself. I surveyed a number of my clients and got back 20 responses. All 20 of them said some form of, yes, it's really important for people to take vacation. And then I don't dare to take them, or my life is too busy, or whatever, some reason that they weren't doing it. And especially in this time of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, why is somebody else going to take vacation if they don't see their manager taking it? Your words are more important. That's what makes visible what you really value. Your not just your word, but your actions. And so take vacation yourself. Second, if you can, declare vacation at the same time for the entire organization. One of my clients actually declares one day a month these days during the pandemic as a vacation day for the entire company. And it relieves some of that pressure for people to take that time off. They are not actually allowed or encouraged to do any work business. And then last, I would say vacations, take them in short bursts, just like meetings, more often and shorter. Similarly with vacations. Somebody just recently took a half day and he went and picked flowers in the garden for his wife. And, small things. It's as my friend Beth likes to say, find the extraordinary moments of ordinary bliss. Extraordinary moments of ordinary bliss, because we are forced to slow down and we are forced to appreciate what we have right here in front of us. So take vacation to be able to see what you have in front of you with new eyes, so that when you come back to work, you're much more likely to be in an innovative, creative mindset.
That's a beautiful sentiment, Sabina. Thank you for sharing. We have Rick in the stream, though, echoing, I think, a very real fear that a lot of people have. He says people are afraid they will be furloughed if they take vacation. Either of you, do you have anything to say about that? I think we're demonstrating how important it is to take that time for yourself to find space. But Rick is right. People are nervous right now. They're afraid to say I need a break, or that I'm not ready to work 100% of the time. What would you say to that, Sabina?
I would say, firstly, understand what the policies are around vacation right now, not just in general in your company, but right now, what are the policies for vacation, and see if you can follow some of those. Secondly, there's strength in numbers. So find allies. If you're the only one and you're taking vacation every other week for a week, which I'm sure you're not, Rick, then you're sending a certain kind of message. But if you and all your colleagues agree that we're all going to take some time off in staggered ways, then you're creating some safety in numbers. And speaking of safety in numbers, you can also make that really practical for the work, where we can collect as a group and say, how can we train each other to have each other's back and cover for each other when we are taking that break? And remember, if vacations are much shorter, you don't always even have to take a formal make it a thing. So if you took half a day and you've made up for it plenty in the extra time you put in, then just take that time and space for yourself.
Thank you for those practical tips, Rick. I hope that was helpful to you. I hope you can kind of rally the team around you to make that feel like a safer thing to ask in your company. Michael says he is loving this. So thank you, Francesca. Thank you, Sabina. He says, hit the pause button to take care of yourself before projecting forward. Francesca, with that, I know you have a formula for self-care. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a two-step formula. Obviously, self-care is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and we get sold a lot of things under the label of self-care. But the way that I look at self-care is, number one, to ask yourself really proactively, how do I want to feel? So how do you want to feel during this time while you're working from home, right? There's a lot of uncertainty but how do you want to feel? And maybe a good starting point is, how don't you want to feel, right? So if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling disempowered, if you're feeling a lot of anxiety, so that's a starting point. Like knowing how you don't want to feel is a good way to let you know how you do want to feel. And then the second part of it is to really be creative and ask yourself, okay, what are the actions that I can start to take to support myself in feeling that way? So for instance, if you are feeling maybe very overwhelmed or disempowered about all the things that are happening in the world right now, then, okay, look at, okay, what are some of the actions that I can take to help me feel more empowered? Maybe it's about taking more proactive actions, taking some small steps in your own life that can make you feel more empowered. Maybe being of assistance to someone else, being of service to someone else can help you to feel more empowered. Sometimes it's not about taking a new action, but it's about eliminating an existing action that doesn't serve you. So I know that for a lot of people, they consume a lot of news and they consume a lot of social media. And I am the same. However, I actually don't watch the news anymore because to me, it's too overwhelming, right? So that's something that I eliminated from my life. For me, it's a lot easier to read the news than it is to watch it. It has a less of an emotional impact on me. So being very creative about, okay, what can I eliminate? How is my routine? How are the things that I habitually do make me feel? And how can I start to be creative about little ways that I can shift that so I can support myself in feeling the way that I want to feel?
That is a wonderful formula. Thank you so much. We're seeing in the stream really appreciating all this advice. Both Lori and Ismander saying these are great thoughts about seeing what's in front of us, seeing the extraordinary moments and ordinary bliss. Francesca, Sabina, thank you so much for joining us today on this Friday and giving us all this great practical advice.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Susie. It's been great.
Thank you, Susie. It's been a blast.
I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you to you both. And thank you to the stream for joining us. It was really great to see your energy and the comments and the questions today. We are Business Unusual. We are here live 5 days a week from the LinkedIn news page. On Monday, please join us again. My colleague, Caroline Fairchild, will be having a conversation with Sally Krawcheck. She's the CEO of Elvest. She'll be talking about how her company's been expanding and also about managing your own personal finances during the pandemic. You won't want to miss it. Sally is a really great, energetic guest with lots of great advice. I hope you will join Caroline and her for that conversation and have a great weekend.